Today is Saturday, so I thought I'd just catch you up on the book that I finished last, and that was Luster by Raven Leilani. I feel like this book has been on my TBR for so long, but it's definitely not quite what I was expecting. For some reason I had it in my head that this book was going to be similar to like Fake Accounts or Exciting Times, but it's a lot darker than that, I think. It's about a young black woman living in New York. She works at a publisher's and has just started a relationship with an older married man, but it's a sort of open relationship in the fact that his wife knows that it's happening. And we sort of follow this character as her life slowly sort of slips out of her control and she gets more and more entangled with this man's family. In fact, much more entangled with his wife and daughter than she actually does with him. The writing style really captured me right from the beginning. It's so engrossing and immediate. She would describe things in these really unusual and almost roundabout ways, but you completely understood exactly what she meant by that as well. Definitely made the reading experience really enjoyable. I thought the plot itself really slowed down in the middle. Not a lot was really happening, and I sort of felt like I wanted more to happen with the characters because I thought they were really interesting, particularly the female characters. I felt like the man was just so boring, but potentially that was the author's intention. But all the other characters had such complicated emotions that they never really overtly expressed. So in that way, perhaps it was quite realistic. I really enjoyed it, and I definitely would be picking up anything else Raven Leilani writes. So I'm currently still reading The House of Mirth by Edith Wharton. I started this at the beginning of the year, but I just kept getting distracted with other books, so I haven't got very far through it. But I decided to focus on this one for now. I don't know whether it's just if I'm not in the right headspace for it or whether it's the book itself, but I'm finding it a little bit difficult to get into, in that I'll read maybe 20 pages and feel like that I've had enough for now. I think Wharton is incredibly good at creating really interesting and very realistic characters, and so when you get to the sections where it is just characters having conversations, those are definitely the most interesting for me. But I feel like the book is mostly giving a very overarching view of the events that are happening. She's really skipping over months and just giving third-person paragraphs about what has happened during those months. It's definitely not a very action-packed book either, but I think I'm comparing it to The Age of Innocence, which I actually don't remember the story of that one as much as I probably should, having really enjoyed it when I read it. But considering I loved The Age of Innocence, I think just in comparison, this one is feeling just not as good as that book. I really like the characters and I really like the story, in terms of the fact that it's about a woman in society in New York in the early 1900s. They sort of vaguely mention that she might be about 29 years old, and so she's quite desperate at this point to get married and secure her future because she is about to leave her youth, and the only thing she has to her advantage is how smart she is at talking to other people and how beautiful she is. So there's so much potential with that character, but I feel like it's being a little bit wasted so far in this novel, just because not so much is happening. Though I did recently get spoiled for the ending of this book, which was very annoying, because I was watching the new Reese Witherspoon rom-com on Netflix called Your Place or Mine, and Reese Witherspoon talks about how this is her favorite book and then talks about the ending as if it's like some really famous, well-known book that everyone knows the ending of, so it's fine to spoil it. Maybe in America this is huge. It's not a Little Women story where, you know, we're at the point where it's fine to spoil it, kind of. I'm trying to remember what films I've seen recently, but I don't think there were any that I really enjoyed. I did see Aftersun last week, and very sadly did not love that as much as everyone else did, which really is a trend with me. I really don't know what's wrong with me. I think I just don't feel things in the same way other people do. Aftersun stars Paul Mescal. He's like a 30-year-old dad to an 11-year-old girl called Sophie, played by Frankie Corio. They're both Scottish. It's written and directed by a Scottish person called Charlotte Wells, and it's sort of Sophie's memories of this holiday that she went with her dad to Turkey in the early 2000s. So some of it is shown through this camcorder that he has, which is such a nice idea because I think the film is set in 2003, and so I was about that age in that year as well as the girl in this film. And my parents also had a camcorder, so I really love the premise in that respect of it being about memory and the way we remember things, and the way you might experience something as a child can be completely different to the way the adults around you are experiencing it. There's lots of great themes in there, and I thought the acting was incredible, but I just really didn't like the style of direction and the cinematography. I felt felt it went overboard, was trying to be arty. There were so many times when the camera would pan away from the actors and you could still hear them having the conversations, but it would just be pointed in another part of the room, or just long shots of things that I didn't really quite understand why we needed such a long shot of it, except to be kind of arty and pretentious. It just really annoyed me. It made me feel really disconnected from the story. I think those techniques can absolutely have a place and a purpose if you use them sparingly, because then they are more effective. But if you just do it throughout the whole film, then it just becomes annoying and frustrating, especially when you have these two actors who are doing such great performances and you're not letting us see them. I didn't really like the way it was edited together either. I felt like it was very choppy. It felt like each scene was quite disconnected from the others sometimes. The ending is very powerful and made me cry, so it still did affect me in that way, but it just took way too long to get there. Today I'm going to see Living, which is the film with Bill Nighy, written by Kazuo Ishiguro, which should be interesting. I don't think he's written a screenplay before, so I hope this one is good. I'm excited for it. I will let you know my thoughts after I've seen it. Hello, so last time I spoke to you was pretty much exactly a month ago. In between that time, my computer decided to die, so I could not do any editing. Very inconvenient considering I did want to make an Oscars video. My computer is very old, it's a Toshiba, so they don't actually make that brand of computer anymore, but luckily the computer place that I went to, they were still able to source spare parts because it was the fan very specifically that decided to break. So that is all replaced and my computer is back to normal. So in the last month I finally finished The House of Mirth by Edith Wharton. This very much unfortunately read like a first draft for me. I think the story and the characters could have been the basis for a really interesting novel, but I just think there wasn't enough in it to warrant a whole novel really, because I felt like it got quite repetitive. The main character, Lily Bart, kept kind of making the same mistakes over and over again, and I never really emotionally felt this supposedly great love story between her and the character of Lawrence Selden. And as I said before, having been spoiled for the ending, it just kind of left me feeling a bit meh at the end of it. I still think it was really interesting in terms of being a snapshot of the time in which it was written, of wealthy Americans in the early 1900s living in New York. It's definitely much more gritty than you might expect from a classic novel, in that it does talk more about class and really kind of judges these wealthy people a lot more than I think other classic books do. And Lily really does sort of slowly descend into this middle class status in a way, if not sort of working class, which I think is pretty unusual. There's definitely a lot of interesting aspects to it, but it just didn't work for me as a whole cohesive novel. To finish up this vlog, I just thought I would go through all the films that I have seen over the past month. Not all of the films, but the films that I have been invited to see for media screenings. I've been feeling a bit guilty that I go to all these free screenings and don't do really anything apart from like tell my friends and my work colleagues about the films that I've seen. So I feel like I need to be a bit more consistent in using this platform to do do kind of more proper film reviews maybe. However, I know that people who do film reviews on YouTube, they do like one video per film, and I genuinely don't think I'd have enough to say about every single film to do a whole video. Plus that's so much editing, like you really would have to have this as your job to be able to do that. But maybe I could do like a fortnightly wrap up or something like that. I'll see if I can experiment and see what works. Anyway, I have 9 films, so let's just go through them. So obviously I watched Living. I really enjoyed it. It is exactly what you would expect a Kazuo Ishiguro film to be like. It is about very repressed British men. They're sort of upper middle class, this particular group of men that this story follows. It's based on a 50s Japanese film called Ikiru by the director Akira Kurosawa, who I know is a really famous Japanese director. I don't think I've watched any of his films though, but I would be really keen to see the original version of this film. It's about Bill Nighy, who has sort of lived his life very quiet and by the book in his job, where they're basically just shuffling papers around different offices. And then he gets a particular diagnosis that sort of causes him to shake up his life a bit and start living, as the title would suggest. I just really enjoyed the way this was shot and filmed and the tone of it. It was really unusual. It doesn't follow the same beats that perhaps a British film about these types of characters would normally follow. It's just a really sort of artfully, very quietly done film, but really packs a punch, and I think all the actors are really good in it as well. Bill Nighy is just such a standout in it. He's so quiet and so inward, but just like a glance or one sort of eye twitch just reveals everything that he's thinking, and it's just so devastating, but so beautiful as well. I then watched a film called Missing, which is a sort of follow-up from the makers of the film Searching that came out a few years ago, starring John Cho. That was like the first film, I think, to do everything on screens. So everything you saw in the film was filmed on like web cameras and phone cameras and CCTV footage, security cameras, that kind of thing. And in Searching, I thought it worked really well. John Cho is obviously a really good actor, so that helps, but I actually watched that on my laptop, and it really felt like I was on a Zoom call with him or something like that while watching it. It was quite surreal in a way, and almost a better way to watch that film than at the cinema. So this one uses that same format, but it follows a young girl whose mother goes missing while she's on holiday with her new boyfriend. This one wasn't quite as successful for me as Searching, but it really was a lot of fun in a way that like reading a trashy but really good thriller can be. I just like audibly gasped at every single twist because it was just so fun to do that. Some of the twists were kind of silly and over the top, and I think the film really built up into something that didn't feel quite as realistic towards the end perhaps as Searching had, but so fun to watch. One thing that did really take me out of the film is that this girl is clearly like a Gen Zer, and she's using a laptop a lot of the time, and I sort of felt like that was unrealistic because I just have this assumption that all young people only use their phones at this point, but maybe I'm wrong about that. I then watched Cocaine Bear. I was very saddened about this in that it was not bad enough to be really fun, but not good enough to be good either. This film takes a true story where someone threw some cocaine out of a plane over some woods in America in the 80s, and a bear ate some of it. And in real life, the bear died, obviously, but in this film, it imagines what if the cocaine just turned this bear into this sort of hyper-aggressive monster, basically. I found the problem with this film is that it had a lot of different characters who all had their own storylines, and the film really wanted you to care about them as well. You're there to see a bear attack people, and it certainly does that a lot, but very much to characters that it doesn't need you to care about really, so the stakes aren't really that high in a way. Basically, too many characters survived is my complaint with this film. I did think the bear was amazingly animated. It had some fun moments, but I think most of those were kind of spoiled by the trailer anyway. I then watched Empire of Light, and this is the latest Sam Mendes film, which has been getting really bad reviews, and funnily enough, I actually didn't mind it. It's about Olivia Colman. She is a woman working in a cinema in a town in the south of England by the ocean. You slowly sort of find out that she has had and still has a lot of mental health issues, and then a young black man begins to work at the cinema, and they kind of have this relationship with each other, and she learns sort of more deeply about the racism that is happening during this time, during the Margaret Thatcher era. A lot of people have really criticized it for being very heavy-handed when it comes to talking about racism. It's certainly not giving a new or nuanced look at racism. I feel that the way the story is told is very stepped back. I feel like it's really just showing what happens in this story, showing what happens to these characters. And so yeah, you're not getting any nuanced takes on racism, but you are just seeing presumably what did happen in the 80s in Britain at that time. I really just thought the performances were all so lovely. I really loved seeing this cinema in action. You get the sense of the fact that it's kind of the last of the old style cinemas, and you just enjoy spending time with this group of colleagues who all work in the cinema. There's a lot of films that want to talk about why cinema is so impactful and amazing, and I don't think many of them do it that well because the people who make them already love it so much that they can't really explain it to someone who might not get it already. And I think this film probably does the best that I've seen of recent films to really explain why cinema can be so transforming for people. I just think it was really interesting to watch. I thought it was really beautifully shot, and I just didn't think it was nearly as bad as people were saying. I then watched a film called Champions, which stars Woody Harrelson as a basketball coach. He's not a very successful basketball coach, and he breaks the law by drink driving, and so he has to go do community service and coach basketball for a team of people with intellectual disabilities. This again is not as bad as it could have been, but still not that great either. It's a real shame that the film still feels the need to tell this story through the lens of the neurotypical white man. And that's not to say Woody Harrelson isn't very good, but the actors they got to play the members of the basketball team are so good that you just know that they could have easily carried the film themselves without him. His journey from sort of just ignorant person wanting to achieve success in basketball to caring about this team, being in touch with his emotions and things like that, just didn't feel believable. Everything was so obvious. In terms of his story, he has this very boring love story. Film really does shine when it's focusing on the basketball team, and all the members there are so great. They're so funny. This is a film that would have been good if it had been made in the 2000s maybe, but being made right now, it just felt quite old-fashioned. I then watched Till, which is a biopic about Mamie Till Mobley, who was a black woman in the 50s in America. Her son was lynched while on holiday with his cousins in Mississippi, and it follows her decision to really make this event public and try and use this terrible tragedy to make the change. This is one of those films where the little information text at the end of the film was way more interesting than the film itself. I really felt like I could have learned everything that the film says from her Wikipedia page. The fact that this black woman eventually became this activist for her whole life is such a fascinating story, and I actually thought the film would go on and tell more of that. It's good that it is bringing the story to light because it's not something I had heard about before, but it felt like it was being very cautiously told, and I felt like it could have done a lot more. I then watched To Leslie, which features the now kind of infamous performance from Andrea Riseborough. Her performance was nominated for an Oscar, and for some reason people felt like she had cheated her way to an Oscar. I don't think it was even her doing it. I think it was just the director and the makers of the film itself. But by using their connections in Hollywood and getting actors to support her, she got this nomination, which I really don't get why that's a problem at all. This going in felt like it was going to be a typical film about poor white southern people in America, but I actually think it had a much more interesting tone and a way of telling this story than I was expecting. So Andrea Riseborough plays Leslie, who about 10 years ago or so won the lottery, and then you slowly learn that she just basically wasted all that money away because she is an alcoholic. And so the film kind of follows her reconnecting with people in her life, including her son, and going back to her hometown and dealing with her struggles with alcohol. She is really good in the role, as you would expect from Andrea Riseborough. She just is an amazing actress. You fully believe in her as this character, and you see these sort of sparks of the person she could be if she wasn't drunk all the time, but it never feels disingenuous. She's a very particular character, and she is consistently like that throughout. The film definitely picks up when she meets a character played by Mark Maron. He's really good in this role. I would say without him, the film would definitely not be as good. I mean, he's a little bit unbelievable because he's just so nice, but Mark Maron just kind of makes it work. Then I saw Scream 6. A lot of people have been saying they preferred this over the last Scream film, but I'm in the complete reverse opinion. I do not think this is as good as that film, and I think it's probably the weakest Scream. I know people hate on Scream 3, but I personally really liked that one, so I was a little bit disappointed because I did enjoy the last one so much. but I felt like it was a bit of a cop-out. I felt all the meta aspects were just a little bit too repetitive from the last film. I felt like the characters were a little bit one note. The reveal of the killer was kind of fun, but there just weren't that many characters to choose from anyway. So moving the setting of the film to New York was quite interesting. It did lead to some different locations for the stabbing sequences. The one in the subway was particularly effective. It was so tense. I also didn't think this one was as funny either. It's a shame because I really did enjoy the opening. It had a really great way of playing with the format, and you also had Samara Weaving in the Drew Barrymore role doing her Australian accent, which was very enjoyable. I just didn't find this one as engaging as the last one. And lastly, I watched an Australian film called Of an Age. If anyone watched Dance Academy back in the day, this stars Sammy from that show. Tom Green is the actor's name. The main character is called Cole. He's played by Elias Anton, who was also in an ABC TV show called Barracuda. It starts out in 1999, and Cole needs to get to his dance final, but his dance partner, his best friend Ebony, is calling him up from a phone booth on a random beach somewhere, having been on a night out. Tom Green plays Adam, Ebony's brother. He's a bit older and is home from South America where he's been living, and helps out by driving Cole to find Ebony. And in this basically hour-long car journey, they bond, and it sort of sparks the sort of one-night stand love story in a way, because Adam is just about to go back to South America the next day. The first initial car conversation is so beautifully done. You really get to know these characters so well. I feel like Australian scripts often really over-explain things. This did not do that. It really stripped everything back, and you just got from their performances the older, slightly more mature character of Adam and the very young and inexperienced Cole, who has just graduated from high school, and the way when you're at that age that you can be so pretentious and so confident and also just so self-conscious and insecure as well. The film then flashes forward about 11 years, I think it is. I didn't find that section quite as effective. In fact, I didn't think any of the film really lived up to that first car sequence because I think it was just so brilliantly done. But it still is a really well done Australian film. Really very accurately represents living in the suburbs like that. Weirdly, the section set in like 2010 felt so much more dated than the one set in the 90s. Obviously because everything 90s is fashionable at the moment, especially the clothes. They very accurately portrayed the 2010s, I think, in the costumes and the hairstyles. Just gave me flashbacks to my like high school and university days. I would recommend checking Of an Age out if it sounds like something you would be interested in, because I think good Australian films are rare, unfortunately, so it's always great when one comes out that is actually really well done. Thank you so much for watching. Fingers crossed my computer doesn't break while I edit this, and I will hopefully be back soon with another video. Bye!